In 1877, Matthew Carter, a 30-year-old rancher, lived alone in a modest cabin on the vast Arizona plains. His days followed a steady rhythm, the lowing of cattle, the creak of his saddle, and the ceaseless whistle of the wind across the open land. Solitude was his companion, his conversations limited to murmurs with his horse or the herd. People were scarce, and he preferred it that way, hardened by years of isolation. But on a spring evening, as dusk painted the sky in deep purples and oranges, his routine shattered. Riding the fence line to check posts weathered by winter storms, Matthew's sharp eyes caught an anomaly by the riverbank. At first, he thought it was a discarded bundle or perhaps a wounded animal. His chest tightened with unease. He urged his horse closer, the lantern swinging from his saddle casting a dim glow. As he approached, the shape resolved into something far more troubling, a woman, an Apache woman, crumpled in the mud. Her face was bruised, lips cracked and bleeding, her body curled as if clinging to the last threads of life. She was no older than he, perhaps younger, her black hair matted with dirt and rain. Matthew dismounted, his boots sinking into the damp earth. Caution warred with compassion in his mind. Every settler's tale of danger involving natives flooded his thoughts, retribution, mistrust, violence. Yet the sight of her, frail and broken, stirred something deeper. He knelt beside her, and her eyes flickered open, burning with defiance despite her weakened state. She muttered words in a tongue he couldn't grasp, her trembling hands pushing weakly against him. But her strength faded, and she slumped, unable to resist. He hesitated only a moment before sliding his arms beneath her, lifting her carefully. She was light, fragile as a child, her body limp against him. The ride back to his cabin was silent save for the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then in heavy sheets, soaking them both. She leaned against his chest, too weak to protest, her shallow breaths barely audible over the storm. Inside the cabin, Matthew laid her gently by the fire, its warmth cutting through the chill. He stripped off his dripping coat, tossing it aside, and stood watching her frail form on his rug. Had he invited danger into his home? Or something else entirely? He retrieved an old quilt from a chest and draped it over her, tucking it close to trap the heat. Her eyes opened again, tracking his every move, wary but too exhausted to resist. "You're safe here," he said softly, unsure if she understood. "No one's gonna hurt you." He poured water into a tin cup and knelt to offer it. She turned her face away at first, mistrust etched in her expression, but thirst overpowered her caution. She sipped slowly, lips trembling against the rim. When he offered bread, she took it with the same reluctance, chewing as if testing his intentions. Through the stormy night, Matthew tended her wounds. He heated water, cleaned her cuts with a rough cloth, and applied salve to the bruises marring her skin. She flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. Wrapped in his quilt, her breathing steadied, though her eyes remained fixed on him, a mix of suspicion and something softer, perhaps the first fragile threads of trust. Matthew leaned back in his chair, exhaustion settling into his bones as the fire cast flickering shadows across the cabin. It was past midnight when she spoke, her voice faint but clear. "I run." The words, accented and halting, cut through the rain's drone. Matthew leaned forward, urging her to continue with a gentle nod. She swallowed hard, clutching the quilt. "They force marriage." "Old man." "I say no." "They beat." "Leave me." Her voice broke, and she looked away, shame and defiance warring in her expression. Matthew's jaw tightened, anger simmering beneath his calm. Her words painted a vivid picture, not just of suffering, but of courage. She had chosen to flee, to risk death rather than submit. He sat silently, staring into the fire, the storm's howl echoing his thoughts. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but firm. "No one deserves that." She glanced at him, her dark eyes catching the firelight, softening just slightly. For the first time, the wall of mistrust between them seemed to crack. She lay back, exhaustion pulling her under, and within moments, she slept, her breathing slow and steady. Matthew remained awake, the storm's fury mirroring the turmoil in his mind. He studied her face in the fire's glow, bruised, yet unyielding. She was no victim, she was a survivor, her spirit unbroken despite the cruelty she'd endured. He felt a stirring of respect, laced with protectiveness. Loneliness had long been his companion, but sharing his space with her felt different, new, unsettling, yet right. He wondered what dawn would bring. Would her people come searching? Would his neighbors notice? This act of compassion might cost him everything, his land, his safety, his solitude. The storm raged until morning, the wind rattling the shutters, rain pounding the roof. Inside, the cabin held a fragile peace. Matthew rose once to stoke the fire, glancing at the woman, Naeli. She'd whispered her name before sleep claimed her. She looked smaller in rest, her hands clasped as if guarding herself even in dreams. He returned to his chair, elbows on his knees, watching the flames. Memories of his own past surfaced, his father's heavy hand, his mother's quiet endurance. He knew powerlessness, the weight of having no voice. Perhaps that was why Naeli's story struck so deep. When dawn broke, filtering through the shutters, Matthew's eyes were still open, his body aching from the chair. Naeli stirred, her chest rising steadily. Relief washed over him, she'd survived the night. Outside, the plains glistened, washed clean by the storm. Inside, something had shifted. The silence was no longer that of strangers. As morning light softened her bruises, Matthew saw her strength more clearly. She carried a quiet dignity, a beauty not just in form but in spirit. Naeli had fled a life that sought to crush her, and in her flight, she'd found him. His chest tightened at the thought. Could he offer her the peace she deserved? A man bound to a harsh land, hardened by solitude. Naeli spoke first, her voice stronger now. "I no go back," she said, eyes unwavering. "If I go, he find me. Beat me. Take me." She paused, then added, "I choose this." Matthew swallowed hard. Her words carried weight, defiance, trust, a choice made not from desperation but from courage. "Naeli," he said, the name soft on his tongue, "this is a hard place. The frontier. Food scarce. Winters are cruel. Dangers always close. If you stay, you're no prisoner, no servant. You're equal. Understand?" She tilted her head, eyes narrowing as she processed his words. After a moment, she nodded. "Equal," she repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. Days blended into weeks. Matthew worked the ranch, mending fences, tending cattle, while Naeli moved quietly within the cabin, sweeping floors, tending the fire, her presence filling the space with life. Her movements were graceful, purposeful, as if she'd always belonged. One evening, Matthew returned to find her humming a soft, unfamiliar melody. He paused in the doorway, struck by the warmth of the moment. His cabin, once a hollow shell, felt alive. They shared meals by the fire, exchanging words, bread, sky, fire, heart. She taught him her language, laughing at his clumsy attempts, and he returned the favor, their laughter echoing like music. Trust grew, and with it, something deeper. Naeli was no longer a stranger but a partner, her presence easing the ache of his solitude. Yet the frontier was unforgiving. One morning, as Matthew tended the herd, he spotted riders on the horizon, 3 Apache men, moving fast. His heart sank. He raced back to the cabin, rifle in hand. Naeli saw his fear and froze, whispering warnings in her tongue. "They come," she said, voice trembling. Matthew stood at the door, rifle ready, as the riders approached. Naeli clutched his arm. "No fight," she pleaded. "Blood bring more blood." Torn between instinct and her wisdom, he hesitated. The riders stopped short, calling out in sharp tones. Naeli stepped forward, her back straight, answering in her language. The exchange was tense, heated. Finally, the riders spat into the dirt and rode off. "What did you say?" Matthew asked, lowering his rifle. "I tell them I'm free," she said, eyes fierce. "I'm not his. I choose." Her words hit him like a thunderclap. She'd faced her people, risking everything to claim her freedom. Pride and awe swelled in him. That night, they sat by the fire, her decision hanging between them. Matthew reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. Her eyes held trust, not fear. The days turned, no longer marked by loneliness but by companionship. They worked the land together, shared laughter, and built a life from trust and courage. The world beyond might never understand, but within the cabin, they did. Naili was not just his home, she was his equal, his partner. Their bond, born of choice, was unbreakable.